So we have to understand the past in order to understand what's going on now. It's not just with the presidency, though. It's with the inequalities that you see when you look around. Like, for instance, if you don't understand the history of law enforcement misconduct in black space, in black communities, Black Lives Matter won't make any sense to you. Now, I want to be very clear when I talk about the history of law enforcement misconduct. I'm not talking about every damn cop. I'm not talking about good cops and bad cops, good people and bad people. I'm talking about a history and a culture of law enforcement that has simply not treated black and brown peoples the same as white folks. And anyone who denies that what I just said is true has not studied history and is not competent to speak about it, right? Because the history of policing traces directly back to slave patrols. That was the first iteration of law enforcement on this land in any real formal sense. It was police, after all, who enforced the slave codes. It was police who enforced segregation after slavery was ended. It was police who conspired to engage in lynchings of thousands of black bodies, releasing suspected criminals or people who weren't even suspected of a crime into the hands of the mob. It was police that pulled protesters off of sit-in stools in the 1960s. It was police that turned water cannons and dogs on children in the streets of Birmingham. It was police that did the same and beat protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. It was cops, along with uniformed military personnel, that rampaged in Mexican-American communities in Los Angeles during the Zoot Suit riots in 1943. That was law enforcement. It wasn't just average people. It was people whose job was to, quote unquote, enforce the law. The problem is, if you live in a society where the laws are unjust, everyone who enforces those laws is engaged in injustice by definition, you see? It's not about good people and bad people. It's about if a system is flawed, the people who enforce that system are culpable. And people of color know that, right? Black folks know, for instance, and brown folk know that it's law enforcement that enforces the war on drugs, which is not about drugs. And we know it's not about drugs. Two reasons that I know it. Number one, the data tells me. What does the data tell me? Every source you want to consult says that white folks use drugs and sell drugs and possess drugs at least as often, if not more often, than black and brown folks do, right? Just as likely to possess, just as likely to use, just as likely to deal. But who gets arrested? We know it's black and brown folks 5 times more likely on average to be incarcerated for drugs. African Americans 4 times more likely to be busted for weed than white folks, even though usage rates for weed are virtually identical. So that's one way that we know it's not about drugs, that we know it's about controlling certain people. And if police are the ones doing that, then why are we surprised that black folks are cynical about policing, right? Why is that shocking? It shouldn't be. The other reason I know the war on drugs is not about drugs is that I'm standing here. And here's what I mean by that. If the war on drugs were actually about drugs, I don't know who'd be giving this talk, but I know it sure as hell wouldn't be me, because I don't think y'all would let me Skype this in from prison. And that's where I'd be right about now if the war on drugs were actually about drugs. And I can admit that because the statute of limitations has expired on this, so nobody can touch me now, right? No, I don't need like applause for weed. Like, that's weird. Like, you don't need to, woo-hoo, he used to get high. Woo, you know. No, it's all good. My asthma came back. I can't do that anymore. But, and I got kids. I'm trying to set an example. But my point is, right, if the war on drugs were really about drugs, myself and a whole lot of other white folks would be doing time, right? Because, I worked in public housing projects as a community organizer for about 15 months in the 90s, and I saw fewer drugs in public housing than I saw on a typical weekend on the 8th floor of the dorm where I lived my freshman year of college at Tulane University, uptown in New Orleans, right? I saw fewer drugs in 15 months in public housing than I saw on a typical Saturday night in room 804, y'all, which I think was my room. But I can't be sure because drugs were involved. But you get the point, right? War on drugs isn't about that. But if law enforcement enforces the law that way, that's why people of color are going to look sideways at cops.